Alrighty, that was the end of chapter 29. Now we're going to go on to chapter 30 here. So this is Lessons in Tanya. We are starting chapter 30 in Lessons in Tanya, which is commentary on what's called the Tanya. And we're in the subsection or the part called Likutei Amarim, chapter 30. And then Lessons in Tanya is elucidated by Rabbi Yosef Weinberg. So he did an amazing job of chapter 1 of putting in the Hasidei Moto Olam. If it wasn't for that, I probably wouldn't know about Hasidei Moto Olam, because Hasidei Moto Olam aren't written directly in the Tanya. I had to look in other places in Hasidus where the Alter Rebbe did write about Hasidei Moto Olam and the like. It's just not in the Tanya. So he probably didn't want to go to jail or be executed by the Russian authorities, because it would have looked like he was he didn't want to give the impression of Judaizing non-Jews or whatever. He was already jailed once or twice before. Okay, chapter 30. In chapter 29, the Alter Rebbe discusses various means of overcoming Timtum Halev. The state of insensitivity in one's heart is dull and unresponsive to his contemplation of God's greatness. All these methods are aimed at crushing one's spirit, whereby one crushes the cause of the Timtum Halev, the arrogance of the Sitra Achra of the animal soul. In chapter 30, the Alter Rebbe continues this discussion by outlining another method of dealing with this problem. One who suffers from Timtum Halev must also set his heart to fulfill the instruction of our sages. Be lowly of spirit before every man. Now, a number of commenters have noted a difficulty in the Mishnaic dictum, for the Hebrew language distinguishes between two types of humility. The first is a feeling of inferiority in comparison with others. The second is the absence of self-glorification, even while recognizing one's superiority. The thought that his superior qualities are a God-given gift and that another man similarly endowed might in fact have invested them to a better advantage. Oh, interesting. So he can see that he's gifted, but he still considers himself lowly because another person with those same gifts could be doing better than him. So he's still trying to do better, right? His haughtiness could be seen as like a blockage. Sorry, guys, my nose is still stuffed. The former type of humility is called shiflut, literally lowliness, and the latter aniyut. Since the Mishnah employs the adjective shval ruach, it explicitly is advocating the former type of humility. And here the difficulty arises. Why should one regard himself as being lower than every man, lower even than the lowliest sinner? Because of this difficulty, some commentators interpret the Mishnah as saying, conduct yourself self-effacingly toward every man, i.e., treat every man with deference as though he were superior to you. The Alter Rebbe, however, objects to this interpretation as follows. The wording implies, be thus and do not merely act thus in all sincerity. So be this thing. Don't just act like it. In the presence of every man, be. Even in the presence of the most religiously irreverent people, call Shebakalim. Shebkalim. Shebkalim. Not sure how to pronounce that. I'll have to. Shebkalim. Having rejected this interpretation, however, we remain with the original difficulty. How is one expected to regard himself as being lower than the lowliest sinner? Excuse me. In answer, the Alter Rebbe states that the introspective Benoni will find that he often fails to wage war against his evil inclination to the same extent as the sinner is required to wage war against his desires. Although the lapses of the Benoni may be in seemingly inconsequential matters, they are more reprehensible than the lowly sinner's transgressions. Thus, even the Benoni, whose observance of the Torah and mitzvahs is impeccable, can indeed regard himself as being lowlier than literally every man, as the Alter Rebbe goes on to say. This can be accomplished by following the instruction of our sages. Judge not your fellow man until you have stood, i.e., placed yourself in his place. So it's kind of like walking in his shoes type thing. You probably heard the phrase, don't judge another man until you've walked in his shoes. I think it's similar. For it is literally his place, i.e., his physical environment, that causes him to sin. So he's a circumstance, and you're not in that person's circumstance. Since his livelihood requires him to go about the marketplace all day, and whenever he is not thus engaged, he is of those who sit at the street corners. Thus his eyes see all sorts of temptation, and what the eyes see, the heart desires. So avert your eyes and what does it say in the Shema? Guard your heart and your eyes. Additionally, it may be his spiritual place, the nature of his evil impulse that leads him to sin. So he's like maybe in the muck, maybe you're not. Maybe the fact that he's surrounded by all these things, but he's doing a better job than you would be if you were in his place, right? His evil nature burns like a baker's fiery oven, which is heated with greater frequency and intensity than a domestic oven. As it is written in Hosea, it burns like a flaming fire. It is different, however, when he goes about but little in the marketplace, and most of the day he is at home rather than at the street corners, and he therefore encounters less temptation. This is what got me about, I lived, well, I don't want to speak ill, it's going to sound like it. But communities that oftentimes remove themselves or try to remove themselves from the world. Let's put it that way, just so I don't make anyone upset. But just, you know what I'm saying? Like I'm not saying you don't want to go into like really bad places, but you can't think you're holier when you've separated yourself from all these other things that are going on in the world. You can't think you're better than the other guy that lives maybe in town rather than living way out somewhere. You know what I mean? It is different, however, when he goes about but little in the marketplace. Most of the day he's at home. Yeah, right. Rather than those street corners, and therefore encounters less than temptation. Even if he does go about the marketplace all day, so that his physical place is the same as that of the claw shabakailim. It may be that his spiritual place is different than he is not so in that he is not so passionate by nature, and he is therefore not as greatly tempted by the sights of the marketplace. For the evil impulse is not the same in everyone. One person's nature may be more passionate and the other's less so, as explained elsewhere. So he's talking a little bit about not what I'm talking about. He's talking about a spiritual place as well, which kind of touches on what I was talking about. But if the misdeeds of the Kal Shabakailim are indeed attributable to his environment and to his passionate nature, why does he deserve his derogatory appellation? To this, the Alter Rebbe replies, in truth, Even he who is extremely passionate by nature and whose livelihood obliges him to sit all day at the street corners has no excuse whatsoever for his sins, and he is termed a Rasha Gamor, a complete evildoer, for not having the dread of God before his eyes. For he should have controlled himself and restrained the feeling of desire in his heart because of the fear of God who sees all his actions. This fear of God would have enabled him to overcome his desires, despite the difficulties imposed by his surroundings and his nature. For, as explained above, the mind has supremacy over the heart by nature of one's birth, i.e., it is man's inborn characteristic that his mind is able to master and restrain his heart's desires. Truly is a great, fierce struggle to break one's evil nature, which burns like a fiery flame for the fear of God. Indeed, it is like a veritable test. Therefore, every man ought to weigh and examine his own position according to the standards of his place and rank in divine service. As to whether he serves God in a situation requiring a comparable struggle in a manner commensurate with the dimensions of such a fierce battle and test as the Kal Shabakalim faces. Shabakalim. Even the most dispassionate and cloistered of men must often engage in battle with his evil inclination, both in the area of doing good and in that of turning away from evil, as the Alter Rebbe goes on to illustrate. In the realm of do good, in the service of prayer with kavana, devotion, for example, he must battle his evil inclination daily in order to pour out his soul before God with his entire strength, to the extent of wriggling. Hope Daniel listens to that. To the extent of wriggling out of his soul. We were joking around. Is it wiggling or is it wriggling? And looky.
Are you making fun of me?
No. No, I could be
It's
making fun of
wiggling.
myself. So we were joking around how many times we see this. Is it wriggle or is it wiggle? So how often do we see wriggle out in the wild? To the extent of wriggle out his soul, i.e., exhausting of all his intellectual and emotional power in devotion. This battle must be waged both before, i.e., preparatory to, and also during prayer, as follows. He must wage a great and intense war against his body and the animal soul within it, which impede his devotion, crushing and grinding them like dust every single day before the morning and evening prayers. And it's even mentioned in the morning prayers. It's even mentioned in the prayers to grind.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Interesting because the Ketoret has to be ground and crushed like dust every single day.
amazing. That's really cool, Dix, or Mercy.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're exactly right. The Ketoret. And it said, I don't know what prayer siddur you have, but in the Chabad siddur, in uh, 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 in the Chabad siddur, it said this is how it starts, and then it explicitly mentions what is to be ground. It's actually the klipa. So yeah, it's pretty cool that
And
you'd notice that.
there's a rhythm to it as well. There's a rhythm with words that are used, Hebrew words,
Grind it thin.
repetitively. So it's almost as if, well, what is the rhythm and the frequency behind this one now?
Yeah, it teaches you what it is. Like grind it thin,
Mhm.
in
And the
the English.
Ketoret, yeah,
Sorry?
they take it and grind it. They as they're mixing it, they
Yeah.
all say grind thoroughly grind.
Grind, but it's in Hebrew.
Yeah. So that'd be a good question, Mercy, to ask somebody, because I think you're onto something.
Mhm.
That that's something's going on there. I think you just picked up on something, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Because um yeah, you're supposed to grind it but there's also something about saying it that, yeah, that's cool. I'll have to think about that.
Well, and like what Teresa was saying, grind thoroughly, thoroughly grind. It kind of makes you wonder what Hashem is, desiring for us. It's not just about the mixing of the different plants and herbs and things.
Maybe that's where the phrase the daily grind came from. Like
Yeah.
not I'm halfway joking there.
I know, I know what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah, that's like sometimes I the past week or two I picked up on a few phrases that I'm like, oh my goodness, I think that's
You
that's
know,
what
it does sound like a formula though, a linguistic formula.
yeah.
It wouldn't hurt to research that at all and
Yeah.
see if there's some sources that come up and have some explanation of the repetitiveness is the first key that there's something going on there.
Well, in the Katoret study, it mentions that you say that as you're mixing it because it's the sound and the repetition of the grinding and saying it over, grind thoroughly, thoroughly grind thoroughly, thoroughly grind as they are making the Katoret.
You know what? We're talking
The
about speech here.
Mm-hmm.
There's three garments to the soul: thought, speech, and action. You're already doing it in action, but how do you engage your speech? So I think what's going on here is you're unifying the name. You're using all three garments
At the same time.
at the same time.
Maybe so.
Mhm.
Maybe that's the idea behind it from a spiritual standpoint.
Yeah. And maybe that's
Can
why.
I add, please?
Yeah.
From Self-Stains, it's really good with this. It's not enough to engage in battle before prayer. Even when a person is prepared properly by crushing his animal soul and grinding it into dust, this is no guarantee that he will pray well without struggle. Prayer is more than the recitation of words in the prayer book, which is no great struggle. It is a time of battle between mighty forces as the soul wrestles with all the opposing forces assailing it. This is a spiritual and physical effort in which one concentrates all his thoughts and attention, oblivious to everything else. The combination of such unswerving forces with the effort to arrive at a higher level of union with the divine demands a strenuous battle. To wage this battle on continuous and daily basis, one requires the exertion of the soul and the exertion of the flesh. So right at the top, properly by crushing his animal soul and grinding it into dust, just what we're talking about.
Very good.
That's good, Dixie. And I think Tu B'Shabbat and Rosh Hashanah, the other thing is the dates. When you eat 2 dates, you're supposed to grind them and gnash them between your teeth because they're supposed to be symbolic of having victory over your enemy. And your enemy can even be what you wrestle against your own self within your klipa. And then it can also be external enemies.
You eat 2 dates at once? Is that what it
Well, no, not at one time, but you eat 2 dates. You have to open it up, make sure there's no seed in there and no insects before you eat it. And then you chew it, but you're enjoying the sweetness of it because you have victory over your enemy. So that's the symbolism behind the 2 dates during those 2
Oh, cool.
Moedim. Uh-huh.
I didn't know that. Thank you.
Yeah. You're welcome.
We eat a lot of dates.
That's rabbinic, I think, as well. And ever since I learned that, I've been eating 2 dates a day. for nutritional reason as well. It's good for your blood pressure, but boy,
Oh, is it? Oh, that's cool. I didn't know that.
yeah, I tell you, it's every time I eat them, I'm thinking more on the spiritual level. So one
Hmm.
for the Lipa and one for external.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool.
That's good. I've been eating date cookies. I wonder how that is for the blood pressure. Man, may not,
How
may
much
not be
butter's in it, I guess. I'm sure that's fine.
good.
Sounds delicious.
They are good.
Counteracts the cookie, the sugar.
Mm.
Let's see here. That was excellent. Oh, very good. That gave me something to think about. Um, Also, during prayer, he must exert himself with an exertion of the spirit, so that his spirit should not grow weary of lengthy contemplation of the greatness of God, and an exertion of the body to remove the hindrances to devotion imposed by the body, as will be explained further at length. Anyone who has not attained this standard of raging such a strenuous war against his body has not yet measured up to the quality and dimension of the war waged daily within the call Shabakalim, Shabakalim against the evil nature, which burns like a fiery flame, so that this powerful impulse, be humbled and broken throughout the fear of God. This then is the standard by which everyone must judge himself. Does he battle against his evil impulse during prayer, and similarly in the areas of divine service that the Alter Rebbe will soon discuss, as intensely as the Kol Shabakalim, which battle against his? So too with one's kavana in the grace after meals and in the benedictions, whether those said prior to the eating or those recited before performing a mitzvah, all of which require a battle with one's evil impulse. Not to mention one's intention in performing a mitzvah, that it be done solely for the sake of a mitzvah, i.e., for God's sake. This requires a still greater effort, and in this one will surely find himself wanting. Similarly, with regard to the battle required in the matter of one's occupation and Torah study, one must struggle to study far more than what is demanded by his innate or accustomed desire by means of a mighty battle with his body. When one studies Torah only as much as his natural inclination or habituated diligence dictates, he requires no effort or struggle at all. But in order to match the struggle of the Kol Shabakalim, one must study far, far more than what he would by nature or habit, as the Alter Rebbe continues. For to study a fraction more is one's want entails but a minor tussle. It neither parallels nor bears comparison with the war of the Kol Shabakalim against his evil impulse, which burns like a fire, for which is nothing nonetheless called utterly wicked, of Rasha Gamor, if he does not conquer his impulse so that it be subdued and crushed before God. Similarly, unless one struggles with his evil impulse to study much more than his nature or his habit demands, he is no less wicked than the Kol Shabakalim. But one may object to this reasoning. How, one may say, can I, in all honesty, compare my shortcomings to those of the Kol Shabakalim? I am lacking merely in the quality of the good that I do, whilst he actually and actively violates prohibitions enumerated in the Torah. To this, the Alter Rebbe counters. What difference is there between the category of turn away from evil, in which the Kol Shabakalim fails by active violation, and the category of do good, in which he fails by neglecting to exert himself in prayer, Torah study, and the like? To be sure, there are differences between the two categories, which has its own unique spiritual effects, its own spiritual specific intentions. But these differences pertain only to the person performing the mitzvah. The essential point in a mitzvah, however, is that it is an expression of the will of the only and unique God. And in this, there is no difference whatsoever between the two categories, as the Alter Rebbe continues. Both are the commandments of the Holy King, the only and unique one, blessed be he. The failings of the observant individual in the quality of his prayer, Torah study, and so on are therefore comparable to the transgressions of the Kol Shebakalim. So too with other commandments, requiring a struggle, one may find that he does not wage war adequately against his evil impulse, especially in matters involving money, such as the service or labor of charity, i.e., giving charity in a manner involving labor far more than is wont, and the like. Even in the category of turn away from evil, every thinking man, kol ish, with a seichel, can discover within himself that he does not turn completely and totally away from evil in a situation requiring a battle of the level, i.e., magnitude described above, i.e., the battle required of the Kol Shebakalim, or even in a situation requiring a battle of a lesser magnitude. For example, he may find that he does not summon up the strength to stop in the middle of a pleasant gossip or in the middle of relating a tale discrediting his fellow, as he ought to do, even if it is a very slight slur, and even if it be true, and even though his purpose in relating it is to exonerate himself, as is known from what Rabbi Shimon said to his father, Rabbeinu HaKodesh, concerning a problematic bill of divorce that was improperly written. I did not write it. Yehuda the tailor wrote it. Where the slur was a minor one and the purpose was self-vindication, and yet his father replied, keep away from slander. Note there in the Gemara, Tractate Bava Basra, beginning of chapter 10. The same applies to very many similar things which occur frequently. There too, one will find that he does not resist his evil impulse as he ought to, even in the category of turn away from evil. This is especially true with regard to sanctifying one's self by refraining from indulgence in permitted matters, and this is a biblical commandment derived from the verses, you shall be holy and sanctify yourselves. Moreover, even according to the opinion that the commitment is not of biblical origin, yet rabbinic enactments are even stricter than biblical laws, and one will often find himself succumbing to self-indulgence when the temptation is strong and requires a battle to overcome it. But all these and similar matters are among the sins which people trample underfoot. Insensitive to their importance. Wow. And which have come to be regarded as permissible because they are committed repeatedly. I think the Alter Rebbe talked about this in a chapter or two before. All the above mentioned calculations then can lead one to conclude that he is no better than the Kol Shebakalim. Like the Kol Shebakalim, he too fails to wage war against his evil impulse when it is required of him. Yet this still does not explain the requirement that one consider oneself lower than every man. In what way is he worse than the Kol Shebakalim? In answer, the Alter Rebbe continues. In truth, however, if he is a scholar and upholds God's Torah and wishes to be close to God, his sin is unbearably great, and his guilt is increased manifold. For his not waging war and not overcoming his impulse in a manner commensurate with the quality and nature of the war mentioned above, that Kol Shebakalim must face. His guilt is far greater than the guilt of the Kol Shebakalim. The Kal Shebkalim, the most worthless of the street corner squatters who are remote from God and his Torah. Their guilt for not summing up the fear of God, who knows and sees all their actions in order to restrain their impulse, which burns like a fiery flame, is not as heinous as the It's not as heinous as the guilt of one who draws ever nearer to God, his Torah, and his observance. As our sages of blessed memory said, of the apostate Acher, Elisha ben Avuya, because he knew my glory. I don't know this one. Elisha ben Abuya, or Acher, the other, as he was later called by his colleagues, was a great Mishnaic sage turned heretic. I've heard the name Elisha ben Abuya. So he knew the glory, said God. If despite this he still sinned, his guilt is far greater. Therefore, our sages declared in regard to the illiterate that deliberate sins are regarded in their case as inadvertent acts, since they are unaware of the gravity of their sins. Problem at CA 33b. With a scholar, the reverse is true. An oversight due to lack of study is adjudged as being as grave as a deliberate sin. Thus, his failure to restrain his evil impulse is indeed worse than the failure of the Kol Shebekalim. By contemplating this, the observant scholar will now be able to fulfill the instruction of the Mishnah, quoted at the beginning of this chapter, be lowly of spirit before every man. Thereby he will crush his own spirit and the spirit of the Sitra Achra and in his animal soul. In his animal soul, right? Enabling the light of his soul to permeate and irradiate his body, as explained in chapter 29. Excellent. That's probably a good place to start or stop for today. We just finished chapter 30. And next week we will start on 31.